video. So in the initial video, we showed you the basic setup for your walkthrough form using Google Forms and primarily using Autocrat. So now we're going to show you some additional things that you can do with this to set this up for a little bit better of a more enhanced user experience, not only for you as a person completing the form, but also for your teachers. So what we saw in the previous one is we had a couple of things set up that we're going to change. The first one is under the teacher's name. You saw that instead of having the teacher's name, we had the teacher's email address. And we needed the email address to make sure that when we filled this out, were sending it to them via email, and B, that we were sharing this with them through their Google Drive. And we needed their email in the form to successfully do that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a way to collect their email addresses on the back end so that instead of having their email address here, we can actually have their name. And that what that will do is when we fill out the form and all their information is merged into their sheet or into their document, instead of it saying their email address here, it'll actually show their name. So I'm just going to show you a trick that you can do to set this up. The other thing I wanted to show you is in the previous video, I put everything into one folder, and I have since added some folders within that folder. So now you are going to see grade level folders. So now what we're going to do is we're going to set this up so that whenever we fill out a walkthrough form for a third grade teacher, all my third grade teachers walkthrough documents will live here. And the same thing for all of my kindergarten teachers. Whenever we fill out a kindergarten teacher's walkthrough observation, that document will automatically go there. The process for this is very similar, so that's why I've lumped these together. All of this is going to take place in the Google Sheet. And there are some advanced components to this, but I'm going to try to walk you through this step by step so that you see how this goes. And you'll be able to set this up if this is something that you wish to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my form. And since I'm going to be replacing all of the email addresses with teachers' names, I am just going to get rid of all of these teacher email addresses that I have here listed under teacher name. Okay, so now that we have gotten rid of all of the names inside of here, or the email addresses inside of here, what we're going to do is we're going to set up the names that we want in the spreadsheet, and then we're going to copy and paste it back in here again. So I'm going to go back to my spreadsheet, and if you recall, I had a separate tab down here, the sheet 2, and that contained all of my teachers' names and email addresses listed here. And so you'll see I have a column for last name and a column for first name. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set this up so that I'm going to combine my teacher's last name and first name so that is what will appear in the form. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm just going to create a brand new column. So I'm going to click on this first column so it's highlighted. I'm going to right click on it. I'm just going to insert a column to the left. So now I have a brand new column over here. And I'm going to call this one full name. Full name. Okay. And so now what I'm going to do is I want to combine the teacher's last name and first name. Now, if you prefer to do first name and then last name, that's perfectly fine. You can set this up however you see fit, whatever would be easiest for you to view this in the form. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this up to go to from their last name, then their first name. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm just going to write a simple formula that will combine the two, and I'm going to use the AND symbol to do that. So whenever you want to create a formula in a spreadsheet, what you'll need to do is you'll always need to begin with an equal sign. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell this to give me the teacher's last name. So I'm going to click on their last name. And then I'm going to do the and symbol, and then I want to click on their first name. So I'm telling it to give me the teacher's first name, their last name and their first name. And then there you see the result that will be there. And when I click on it, there it is. You see it combined the teacher's last name and their first name right there. Now I could leave it like that, but you'll see that the way it's set up now is that there is no space in between the last name and the first name. So I just need to go back in here and clean this up so that we do have a space, or at least some sort of separation between the first name and the last name. So that separation could be a space, it could be a comma. So you have a lot of flexibility in terms of what you want that to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back up here. I'm going to click on this one more time. And over here, you're going to see up at the top, there is that formula that we initially wrote to set this up. So I'm going to go up here in front of it. So again, we had the equal sign, and then we had the first name, and now after that first and, I want to include a space in there. So whenever I want to include something that's not in the spreadsheet, I have to make sure to put it in quotation marks. So it can be what's called a string. And so by putting it in quotation marks, as you see there, that makes it a string. And so right now, in my quotation marks, I don't have anything. But what I want to be there is I want there to be a space. So all I have to do is in between my quotation marks, I have to put the space. And so now I have this empty space in between my quotation marks, indicating that I want a space to go there. And then at the end of my quotation marks, I need to include one more and symbol. And so now what I am telling my computer is, in my formula, I'm telling it to give me the teacher's last name and this empty space and their first name. And now when I hit enter, you'll see there it is, their teacher's last name, there's the space, and there's their first name. You can even, if you want to get add something simple in here, like a comma in here as well. So if I wanted to go back up here, and in that space where I have my quotation marks, I could put a comma there. And so now it'll say the teacher's last name and a comma with a space and their first name. And so now I have that there. Okay. And so now what I can do is I can click on this, and in my spreadsheet, I have my fill down option, which is that little square in the bottom right hand corner of the cell, of the active cell. So all I have to do is just double click on this. You see if I put my cursor, you'll see it'll turn to a plus sign. And when I double click, it'll copy that down for everybody. And so now what I can do is I can do what I did in the first video, is I can highlight this entire column and copy it. And now I can go back to my form and I can paste it. So now the next thing that we're going to do is I need to set this up so that in my form that the email addresses are automatically collected on the back end. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go to my form response sheet, and I'm going to create a brand new row. So I generally recommend creating the row right before your AutoCrat merge columns are there. So you'll see where the AutoCrat merge columns usually start where the first one will say merge doc ID, and then you'll see merge URL sample. I want to do it right before that. So I'm going to click on that first one, and I'm going to insert a column to the left of it. So now I have an empty column here. And I'm going to call this one email address. Okay. And I'm going to make this the same format as my one. You don't have to do this part. I just want to, this is just for my sake. So now I'm going to have email address. So now I'm going to set this up so that whenever the name is selected, it's going to know what their email address is. And that's how we're going to collect it. Okay. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to use a function called VLOOKUP. And VLOOKUP is going to allow us to choose something in our data. In this case, it's going to be the teacher's name. And once we look it up, we are going to locate it in another table, which in this case for us is our sheet 2 table. It's going to be this one. And once we find the teacher's name, we're going to tell it to go to this column to get their email address. Okay, so let me show you how this works. VLOOKUP is actually a very helpful function to know when you're trying to know spreadsheets. So I'm going to try to walk you through this. So if you remember, I said any formula or function always starts with an equal sign. I'm going to say equal. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in VLOOKUP. And you see it, as you start to type it in, it'll automatically pop up. So I'm going to choose the VLOOKUP. Okay, and the VLOOKUP is going to give me this little tutorial down here, and it's going to tell me the things that I need. So here for the VLOOKUP, it's going to tell me I need a search key, a range, and an index. And then there's a sorted by, that's optional too. So the first thing it says I need, you'll see it in green, I need my search key. Well, my search key is going to be the teacher's name, because that's what I want to use to search. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to choose the teacher's name. And then I'm going to choose comma. You'll notice in between each one there's a comma, and so you got to put that there so it knows to go to the next one. So you see now my green section is my range, and my range is going to be that table, this table over here in sheet 2. So I'm going to click on sheet 2, and this whole thing is going to be my table. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select the whole thing. I'm going to go up here to column A and drag all the way over to E. Okay, so I just went to A and I just clicked, hold, and I dragged it all the way to E. You'll see here, it'll say sheet 2, A through E. Okay, so that's my range. And then again, if you remember, I need to put the comma there to know that I'm done with that section of the function. So there you see comma. Now I'm in my next one is the index. The index is once I'm in my table, which column are we pulling the information from? Well, we want the email address. So in this case, the email address is the last column. And so the way that we denote that is by the column number. And so column E is the 5th column in our table. So we're going to put 5 here. We're going to put 5 there. And so now that's how it knows that once it finds that teacher's name, we're going to put that email address here. Or it knows which column to pull the email address from, which in this case is the 5th one. And so this last part is sorted. I won't get into great detail about that. All I'm going to do is tell you to just put false here. Just put false, just for ease for right now. And then we're going to hit enter. And so right now the email address says NA. Now the reason the email address says NA is because currently the teacher's name is still from the original one was an email address. So to show you that it will work, I'm going to just choose the first teacher's name and change it. I'm going to take this teacher's name, I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it here. Whoops, that's not what I meant. We're going to copy, let's see, copy this one and paste it here. There it is. And now you see when I pasted that teacher's name there, you see automatically that the email address successfully loaded. So now we have our email address set up. Okay, so that is the VLOOKUP. So we're going to add a few things to this to clean this up so that it works a little bit smoother in your AutoCAD in your walkthrough form. So the VLOOKUP is the main portion that we need, but we're going to add a few things to it. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to add what's called an if error. And the if error is a function that basically says, if there's an error, what do you want us to show? Because sometimes what you're going to see is if there's a mistake there, if it's not reading it, if it's not reading something the way it's supposed to, it'll show up with some weird text. And so what we're going to do is we're going to set this up so that the error messages that we're going to see won't display, because sometimes they can be distracting. So what we're going to do is in front of the VLOOKUP, we're going to type in if error, IFERROR, and then we're going to put open quotation marks. And there it is, there's an if error. So the way the if error reads is, when we put if error, the first thing it says is value. So the if error is what we want to happen if there's no error. So if there's no problem, what do we want to happen? Well, in this case, if there's no problem, we just want it to run this VLOOKUP. We don't want it to do anything but run that function that we just did. So we're going to leave this alone and go to the end and put a comma after it. And then now the second part is, what do you want to display if there is an error? So if there is a mistake there, what do you want to show? And whatever that is, it needs to be in quotation marks. So in this case, what I want it to do is I want it to display nothing. I want it to show no message at all. So I'm just going to put 2 quotation marks to denote nothing. Now, just so you can see what, well, actually, never mind, I won't do that. So I would just put 2 quotation marks and then put close parentheses, and that's it. So you won't see any change because we don't have any errors. Okay, so that one should work fine. The last part that we're going to do is very important, and it's very simple, which is nice. And that is we need to do an array for this. We need to do an array formula for this so that every time a new submission is submitted for our form, this formula will automatically follow to the next entry. So right now, if we do another entry in our form, this formula won't copy down. Let me give you an example. I'm going to go through and fill out the form one more time so you can see what I mean. So I filled out the form, and what you'll notice is that you see all my information went through. AutoCAD ran and it created the document. So that's there. But you'll notice the email address didn't copy down. So the formula that I made here, it didn't follow, it didn't run when I did the new submission. Everything else did except for this. So to do that, I need to set up the array formula, which is very simple. It only takes a few clicks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back up here to make sure I'm selected, have this selected. And I'm going to click anywhere inside this formula up here. Anywhere inside of here. So I'm just going to do mine at the beginning. And on my device, if you are a Windows user, what you're going to do is you're going to press Control Shift Enter. If you're a Mac user, you're going to press Command Shift Enter. So Control Shift Enter, and there you're going to see automatically the array formula is placed in there. So it wasn't anything that you had to do in terms of typing it in there. And so now the only adjustment that you have to make to it is in your VLOOKUP, that first part where we had the cell that we selected, B2, we need to tell the formula to run this for every time there's an entry in B, so all the way down. So the way that we do that is where it says B2, right after it, we're going to put semicolon, and then we're going to put B. So now it knows to run from B2 all the way through B. So every time there is a submission, this formula will now run. Okay, so I'm going to put enter, and now there you see there is the email address. And so I'm going to fill this out one more time so that you can see that when I fill it out, the email addresses will automatically show. Okay, there's my new submission. You see there is the email address that popped through, so that worked. And then in a few minutes, you're going to see AutoCorrect run. There it is. And so now you see there is the all the information there. Okay, and so now we have our form set up so that we can select teachers' names instead of their email address. And also in the walkthrough document. So now when I go here and I view all of these options, you'll see down here, I can click on it. The name of the document has the teacher's name instead of their email address, and it actually has their name next to where it says teacher as opposed to the email address. And so that can just provide a nice cleaner look for your walkthrough, depending, especially if you have a lot of information that you're going to have inside of here. So I do see some schools will have both in there. I would recommend just having one or the other. But that's how you can set up your form so that it has a teacher's name in there instead of their email address, and then you can collect their email addresses in the background. So the other thing I want to show you in this video is how you can set up the dynamic folders. And so this part, the nice thing is this is very similar to what we did just a few minutes ago with the VLOOKUP. You're going to see a very similar experience for that. We're just going to set a few things up for this. So let me show you how you can set up the dynamic folders. So the nice thing about this is it is some work up front, but once you have it done, then you don't have to touch this again. So you'll notice, if you remember, I had folders here, and I made one for each grade level because that's how I'm going to separate this. If you wanted to separate this in a different way, I have schools who set this up. They have a folder for every teacher. They have folders maybe for the observer, and that's where they go. That's perfectly fine. There are additional things that you can do, particularly if you want to set up a folder for every teacher. There are some things that you can do that I'm not going to go into, so that you're not making, you don't have to go here and click new and folder and type a teacher's name in for every single teacher. If you're a high school that has 120 teachers, that is just a whole lot of work. There are some workarounds for that, but for right now, I'm just going to work with this setup of just doing it by grade level. So there's a couple different ways where you can get this set up. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my spreadsheet, and I'm going to create one more sheet down here by clicking Add Sheet. And I am going to put in the folder name, and next to it I'm going to put folder ID. Okay, so I'm going to need to get the name of the folder, and we're going to get the ID of the folder. So let me put the name for each folder. Okay, so I got the name for each folder. And so now what I need to do is I need to get the ID for each folder. So let me show you how you could do that. So I'm going to go back over here, and here is each one of my folders. I'm just going to open one of them up, start with the first grade one. And up here, I have a URL for that folder. And you'll see this last piece of the URL. I'm just going to try if I can click on it on the end here. When I double click on the end of the folder, what you really want is you'll see it'll say drive.google.com/drive/u/0/folders. Now see, after this part where it says folders slash, everything after that slash is the folder ID. So I want to copy that. I want to come back over to my spreadsheet, and for first grade, I want to paste that as my folder ID. Okay, and I'm going to repeat that again. So I'm going to go back to my walkthrough folder. I'm going to open second grade. And then in my URL up here, I'm going to find the word folders. And then after the slash, everything after the slash is the ID. So I'm going to highlight it, copy it, and go back to my spreadsheet. And I'm going to paste it for second grade. Okay. And so now I'm going to repeat that for each one of the folders. So now that we have the folder ID for each grade level set up, you see I've entered the ID for each one. We are now going to go through the same process that we did to set up to collect the email address. We're going to go through that same process here with the folder ID. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go back over here to my form responses sheet. I'm going to add a column just like we did with the email address. I'm going to click on this column here by the email address, and I'm just going to add a column to the right of it. It doesn't matter if you add it to the right or left, but I'm just going to add it to the right. I'm just going to call this folder ID. Folder ID. Okay, and so now this formula that we did up here, this VLOOKUP with these additional functions that we nested with it, we are going to repeat that with the folder ID. The difference is going to be instead of the teacher's name being the lookup value, we're going to look up the grade level that was selected. And instead of looking up the information on this table where we had the email addresses, we're going to look up the information on this table. The only thing that I would just remind you or caution, I shouldn't say caution, but the only thing that I would make sure that you are aware of is that the information doesn't have to be identical. So the information that I typed in here, I manually typed those in. They need to match exactly what would appear in the form. So if the form, for example, says the word first grade, then it won't match because I have the number 1 and then the ST to denote first. So this column, what you have here, needs to match exactly what is in the form. And I believe it does. So, and if it doesn't, it's a very easy fix. You can just come in here and just fix it to match whatever it is. But just know that has to be, they have to be the same for this to work. So we're going to go back here and do this again. And we're going to start with our VLOOKUP. So if you remember with the function, we got to start with the equal sign. So I'm going to say equals and then VLOOKUP. The VLOOKUP automatically populates. Remember, it's going to ask us for a search key, and then we got to put a comma at the end of it. So the search key for us is going to be the grade level. So we're going to click on the grade level for this particular entry, which is right here in E2. I'm going to put comma, and then now it's going to ask us for the range. So now we go over here to the range. Now a key component to the VLOOKUP that works, the search key that we're looking for, in this case, this first grade, in the range that we're going to be searching, the search key needs to be in the first column. So that's an important part. So the way I have it set up is the way you're going to want to have it set up. So again, what I did was for my range, I went to the column and highlighted the whole thing, and hit comma. Whoops, comma. There we go. And then I'm going to put the index. So in this case, the index that we're looking the information up is the folder ID, and that's in the second column of this table. So we're going to put 2 since it's the second column, comma, and the last part for the sorted, we're just going to put false. Put it there, and there it is. There is the folder ID. That's the first grade. And if we go back and check, the first grade folder ID begins with 1JFZ. And here, if we go to the first grade, it begins 1JFC. So there, you can see that one worked. And then now we just need to add those other components to our form. To this function to make sure that it works properly each time a form is submitted. So now I can go over here and I can choose, if you remember in front of the, let me start over. If I go back up here to the my original VLOOKUP in my folder ID, we're going to add the if error. So I'm going to put in if error at the beginning, comma, means between parentheses. And if you remember the if error, the first thing it's asking us for is what do we want to happen if there is no error. And in this case, we want it to run the VLOOKUP. So that one is good. So we're going to go at the end of it and put a comma. And now we go over here to the green where it says, what do we want to happen if there is an error? And if you remember before, we don't want anything to display. We want it to be blank. So we're just going to put the 2 quotation marks to indicate we want it to be blank. Close parentheses. And now that part is set up. And this last part is the array formula. So if you remember, if I go back up here to the original VLOOKUP in the folder ID, I can click inside of that. It doesn't matter where I click. And again, if you are a Windows user, it is Control-Shift-Enter. If you are a Mac user, it's going to say Command-Shift-Enter. You're going to click on that. And there is your array formula there. And the only thing that we have to do is go over here in after where it says VLOOKUP, you'll see it'll say that lookup value, which was E2. We want it to look up E2 through E. So we got to say E2 semicolon E. And now it's going to know to look through everything in that whole column. And so now when I hit enter, there's the folder IDs for the rest of them. Okay. So now we are pretty close to being set up. The hard part is done. So now the only thing that we have to do is we need to go back into Autocrat and we need to direct the documents to go to the dynamic folder as opposed to all of them going into the same folder. So all we have to do is we're going to go into go back to add-ons, go to Autocrat, click launch. We should see the job that we initially created. There it is. Now to go in to edit this job, we are going to click on the pencil and that will allow us to edit this. So we're going to click edit and then it's going to take us through the wizard for this. So we don't need to change the name of the job. That's fine. The template that we're using is not changing. That's fine. We can click next. None of this is changing. All of this will stay the same. So we can click next. The name of the document isn't changing. That's going to stay the same. So we can click next. So here's where we can make some changes. So this first one where we choose the destination folder, we had all of them going into this folder. We are going to change this now since we have the folder ID so that we can now dynamically send them to the right folder. So we're going to delete this one actually. So we're going to go over here to this trash can and hit delete and click yes. And so now this is blank. We're going to leave this the way it is and click next. And now this next part where it says dynamic folder reference. So this is where we can add that part here. And we do that by clicking this button here. And when we click on that, it's going to give us the columns. And so these are all of the columns in our spreadsheet. In our sponsor sheet, these are all the columns. And you'll notice down below is that folder ID column that we manually entered in there with the formulas and everything. And so I can click that folder ID option. And now this is what we're going to be using to dynamically move these documents in the right folder. I'm going to click next. And the rest of this we can just finish off because then the rest of this stuff isn't changing. And I'm just going to click save. Okay, so now this is all done. We're all set up. Now the last part is just to test it. So now we're going to go into our form and fill this out one more time and make sure that the responses document goes into the correct folder. Okay, so now I'm going to press submit. And now in my spreadsheet, I should see there is there's information appeared, there's the name, there's the folder ID, and now their AutoCAD just finished running and they pushed it out, so that's good. And so now I should be able to go over here to my folder, and in this case the teacher that we selected was kindergarten, so I can go to the kindergarten folder, and there it is, with the proper naming convention, with the teacher's name and the date, and all the data properly merged into the document. So that is the Beyond Basics video. A lot of different components that you can do with the VLOOKUP. So we showed you the using the email in the background and using the dynamic folders. And this is just a nice way to enhance the user experience with your walkthrough forms.